Welcome to the Nittany Gritty. I'm your host, Jon Sauber, Penn State men's basketball and football beat writer for the Center Daily Times. We are brought to you by New Amendment, and I am joined, as always, by Penn State men's basketball legend Tim Frazier. Tim, how you doing?
What's going on, John? Different day, different dollar.
Yeah, I told you guys too much information before the podcast about how it's been recently, so we're struggling through it at this point. Been keeping up with all the travel and everything. Made that trip to Philly. Listen, I know I talked a lot about the Palestra on that last episode and how awesome it was. So shout out to Penn State, the SID and the communications department. They actually had me courtside, and I never sat courtside before. And so I went in turn to talk to another beat writer, Nate Bauer, who I'm sure you remember back when he was at Rivals. Now he's at On3.
Yeah.
I turned to talk to Nate, and he couldn't hear me, and I couldn't hear Nate, and I couldn't hear anything, and like my ears were ringing for like 30 minutes because it was so loud in the first half in there. That's the best basketball environment I've ever been in, like bar none. Like it was insane. And credit to the fans. It was like a pretty crazy Penn State crowd, which I think everyone was pretty much expecting. But man, I know you played Penn when you were there, so it's probably a little bit different environment. But that was it was like being in a high school gym, but where everyone actually cared, right? Where everyone actually really wanted to be there and really had an investment in the game.
Yeah, man, I wish I was able to make that, because I'm sure just being able in that environment. Obviously, I played in some crazy great environments in my day, especially being overseas now. Like the environments here and the games are crazy. As far as how much the fans truly care. Like you mentioned about how much everybody basically had a part in the game. Like that's how it is over here in Greece right now. Is that if you believe when they have a part in the game, it's like they're betting on the game. Honestly, that's how crazy they are. So I can only get that feeling that's what you were able to experience at the Palestra. Besides the point of it being such a historic venue, and Penn State playing the number one team, the number two team in the country.
Yeah, and like Penn State in the first half, and we'll get to this in a little bit, came to play, and the fans were like begging for a reason to care, right? Like they were legitimately like any made shot. There were two small children directly behind me who were like shrieking after every make, which didn't make for a fun headache on the car ride home. But whatever, like they're kids, they're having fun. You know what I mean? You want them to enjoy themselves. But it was awesome. Like the unbiased observer here, the outcome doesn't impact my job, right? That's all part of it. That was one of the coolest things. I hope Penn State keeps doing it. I hope they do it every single year. I hope it's a big time opponent every year. I hope the game matters every year. Like that is not something like, as you know, you get in the Bryce Jordan Center, because I was there last night and it was like, oh man, this is what it's like to be able to hear yourself when you're covering a basketball game again.
Yeah, of course. You're not going to get that at the Bryce Jordan Center, but no discredit to some of the fans when they do come, and obviously it gets packed at the Bryce Jordan for certain games, but it's never that on top experience of like the fans being on top of you, which I'm sure you probably experienced in the Palestra, about how you can say like you can't hear the next person when you're talking. You don't get that experience in a Bryce Jordan Center, but it's still a great environment. Still, when it gets full and Penn State is rolling, it's still loud there too. But like you said, I hope they continue to keep doing that. Because that's something that, we mentioned in the previous podcast, that not only helps the team, but it also helps the recruiting angle as well for guys in Pennsylvania to be able to see that team in Philadelphia play.
Yeah, and there were some big names there too, right? Like there were some recruits there. Like you had Kerry Booth, who's committed to Penn State. His dad, Calvin, of course, the GM of the Denver Nuggets. Brad Stevens is there, president of basketball ops with the Boston Celtics. So, like, you had some faces at the Palestra. I think that's a credit to, like, Micah Shrewsberry and everything they've got on there. To what you said, though, about people standing on top of you, you ever, like, how when you're, like, sitting somewhere and you just feel someone over your shoulder? It was 2 hours of that, right? Like where I just felt like someone was like reading my laptop. And mind you, admittedly, I had the Eagles game streaming the end of it during the first half of the game, because you got to make sure the Eagles clinch that number one seed. But like you just could feel someone like right over top of you. And like I kept like turned around a little bit, and like there they were, like eyes over top, like staring down. But yeah, it's crazy. That's the best way to put it though. Like you feel like everything is on top of you, and there's genuinely nothing like that.
John, did you see that I was able to see them? And for the preview of the game, they put something out on Instagram where they had guys narrate, and I thought that was That was so awesome. They had guys, previous players, alumni from Philadelphia narrate, like playing in that game, and they had one of my closest friends, Billy Oliver, do the piano. in the background do the tunes.
That was the best part of it. Yes.
I think that was so amazing. I don't know who got that, who was able to do that. Maybe Nick Kalila, I don't know. But man, that was awesome to have those guys that are born and raised in Philly narrate, and having somebody from Chatham, New Jersey, and these are all Penn State basketball alumni, be able to narrate and put that video together. Man, I thought that was so awesome, man. Honestly, I was a little jealous that I wasn't a part of it. But then, hey, I'm from Texas and they're from Pennsylvania, I guess so, or up east. So I guess I guess to see the reason why.
Well, maybe they'll play in Houston someday, and they can get you on the piano. You know, you can do some sort of instrumental of some music. But that piano, it was of Dreams and Nightmares, right? Like that was like one of the coolest things I've ever heard. Like I saw, you know, they run the credits at the beginning. It's like, you know, Dreams and Nightmares instrumental by Billy Oliver, and like of course, like as I've said before, like I was in high school when you played at Penn State and everything, and I used to go to Penn State games, and I was like, I haven't heard that name in like 10 years. And like suddenly he's doing a piano instrumental of Dreams and Nightmares. It was a really well done video though. You know that. Like that was all awesome. The environment was awesome. Everything was awesome.
Quick background story on Billy. We were roommates, and he could play the guitar, he played the piano, he did so many different things. He used to teach me the guitar and the piano some days and after practice, man. So I don't remember any of that stuff now. But then when I was there, man, he was so well-rounded. I was going to say, hold on. I need proof. I need proof. I want video of you playing guitar. I want video of you on the keys. I want video of you doing something. You got to, listen, if you're not playing Dreams and Nightmares on the next one, then something's the problem. Shout out Billy Oliver, though. Shout out Billy Oliver.
Yeah, man, it was just one of those funny things where I saw that and like I was like, man, like I haven't thought about that name in so long. But there was also a game that day, right? And let's dive into the X's and O's of that, because it was a pretty important game, right? And I think it's hard to talk about that game without also talking about this Indiana game that they played last night. We're recording here Thursday afternoon, because they're kind of, you know, combined together, right? The outcomes were dependent on the other, so to speak, right? The game at the Palestra, Penn State ends up losing a game that they led at the half, 37-31. They lose 76-63. Came out slow at halftime. Of course, what everyone is going to remember is Micah Shrewsberry talking about the refs. Coincidentally, when we put out our clip of us talking about how this team never gets called, right? Like that clip goes out the same day, and then Micah lets him know, right? Like, and he puts out this this long quote, and he said it during the press conference. And I remember, so I was sitting there, and Mark Brennan of Lions 24/7 asked the question, like it was phrased as something like, "Hey, you don't get texts very often. Did you have a point you were trying to get across when you did it?" And then Micah starts by saying, "I didn't have a point to get across." Then he pauses and he goes, "I had 1,000 points to get across." And I immediately turned my phone around because I was recording. I turned my phone around and got ready to tweet because I know something was coming. Like I was like, something was going to be on the way. You know, he was going to be delivering something there, and he did, right? And there were a few things in there that I think we need to talk about before we get into the game. Have you ever heard of a ref not knowing the head coach's name and like not pronouncing the head coach's name correctly?
I haven't, you know, and just, you know, it's very disappointing. You know what I mean? Obviously, I don't remember I don't know the ref's name or who it was, but I just think that's just very unprofessional to not understand what you're going into a job. It's like somebody coming into a job interview and not knowing the person that you're talking to, the boss or name, you know, and I think, especially in basketball, throughout coaches and referees, and even coaches, players, and referees and players, you want to be approached by name to name basis, because you guys are out there. For him to not to know the coach's name, which is and I feel for coaches, it's a slap in the face. It shows that the lack of respect for the team. It shows the lack of respect for him as well. And I'm glad he Coach called him out on it. I mean, it should be known. It should be known around the Big Ten. It should be known that now, hey, you could see. Hey, yeah, we talk about it each and every year about the disrespect that we get with the calls. But now we have the prime example of how I'm not even necessarily the calls that a referee doesn't even know my name or doesn't pronounce it right. Let alone my career, what I've done, even though I'm second year in the Big Ten, of what I've done and the team that I have. This is a team right now fighting, and we're not some just walk over team. And we should gain respect, and we've been gaining respect. And it takes respect from everybody, not necessarily just the commissioner and everybody there. It's from the referees, from the fans, it's from the other teams as well. And I'm glad he spoke up on it, because it needs to be said for everybody to hear and understand what's going on, necessarily about us not getting calls, and besides the basketball piece, I think it's the biggest thing is just out of respect.
Yeah, and I you nailed it. To me, that is like not. I'm a journalist, right? Mm-hmm. One of my main focuses is I always make sure the biggest thing, the main mistake you cannot make is in a story is you cannot spell someone's name incorrectly, right? Like right. Because it's a respect thing. You show that person the respect and the human decency to know their name and to know who they are. And to me, mispronouncing or not knowing someone's name is completely disrespectful. Especially like if someone tells me their name, like I'm saying it like 15 times in my head because I want to pronounce it how they want to pronounce it. I want to call people what they want to be called, right? Like to me, that's the ultimate respect. Like no matter what, like there's, as an example, like there's a running back for the football team named Katron Allen. He goes by Fat Man. That's his nickname. And I asked him, I was like, do you want me to call you Katron or do you want me to call you Fat Man? He said Fat Man. I'm gonna call him Fat Man, right? Like that's what he wants me to call him. You know what I mean? Like that's how I've always been. But like you said, second year in the Big Ten. He spent years with the Celtics, and not just second year in the Big Ten. Second year in the Big Ten as a head coach. He's been in the Big Ten before, right? With Purdue for years, for 2 different stints. He had been with Butler. He's been with Brad Stevens everywhere. Like he's a well-known person, and to not know how to say his name and to repeatedly mispronounce or get his name incorrectly it's completely disrespectful. Like it's the kind of thing that on a human-to-human level, like I have very little tolerance for, because if maybe it happens once and then you apologize and they tell you how to say it and it's all good. But this is a situation where your job is to be informed about the team that the teams that you're reffing for, the teams that you're reffing that game for. You need to know their names. And as Micah said in the press conference, you should know how these teams play, so you can be on the lookout for certain calls, the way they play. Like one of Micah's, I think, biggest complaints was that Andrew Funk is getting grabbed every time he's like trying to make a back cut or they're trying to move him off the ball, and you can see it, right? Like it happened against Purdue a bunch. You go back and watch the TV copy. Funk goes to make a cut. You can see his shirt get pulled, right? You can see like the tightness in the shirt happen because they're pulling him. They're not letting him get free. And I think those were the calls he was most upset about in that game specifically. But like the respect thing is to me the biggest thing. They don't get respect, like you said, because of the stature of the program. That stuff, like he said, like, and whether it's right or wrong, it kind of happens in college basketball just based on who you are, right? Like Tom Izzo gets those calls. Matt Painter gets those calls. Micah doesn't yet. That is what it is. Right. But like the not knowing his name to me is like the highest form of disrespect. And I'm not saying this with any inside information on this, to be clear, but I will be curious to see the next time that Michigan crew officiates a Penn State game, because man, it is like it feels like there's a bridge that has to be mended for whoever the ref was to come back and officiate a Penn State game, because he completely disrespected him, and then Micah, rightfully I would say, put him on blast in a press conference.
He did, like, again, we both said it. He did the right thing. I think he did it the correct way too. Obviously, since I've been there, with the Chellis from Chambers and, from now to Shrewsberry, everybody's come out and said, hey, we don't get the calls. We're going to fight. We're going to fight the two. We're going to try to get the calls, and we don't get them. And at the end of the day, we're not making excuses. Obviously, we lose games because we lose games. Obviously, some calls might go to different ways, but I think a lot of it is what we're asking. And I feel like coaches asking is just a respect on both ways. And that's all you're asking. Hey, if you call a call on one side, call a call on the other side. I think he said that in his press conference also. He was like, hey, we just want to call it fair. If you're going to call us, if you're going to call, with these two teams, if you're going to call it a certain way the first half, don't change the second half. It should be the same way throughout the whole game. And I think that's what us as Penn State fans, Penn State alumni, coaches, yourself, I know you don't have a foot in it, but yourself, you're just asking for it to be fair in both ways. If a team comes out and beats us, if they come out and beat us, they come out and beat us. But we want to have it, make sure that it's a fair fight for both guys, because a lot of this is people's livelihoods, these are people's careers, and this is that could have, if the game went a different way, that changes a lot for the program as well. And so much into that, and I think that's all you want to ask is just for everybody to be fair. We honest, and everybody knows, and I'll be the first to say I know refs make mistakes and we make mistakes, but as an to understand your mistakes and limit those mistakes. The same way as a player, when you get on the court, we're going to make mistakes, but we want to limit our mistakes as much as possible, and that's all you can ask for.
And yeah, I may not have like a stake in the game, but I'm a basketball fan, right? And you can go back, find my tweets from when I covered Indiana, right? Like this has been an issue for Big Ten officials no matter where, right? Like there's a major inconsistency there. I too just want, like, call it the same way throughout. If you're going to call bad calls throughout. If you're going to call no calls, do that throughout too. Just find a way to be consistent and do the same thing over and over again, because otherwise you're putting these guys in bad spots and they're trying to adjust based on what you're calling, and then they adjust and then you start calling it a different way, and what are they supposed to do, right? It puts them between a rock and a hard place. It's not fair to anyone. But like you said, it's a hard job. You said, last episode you would never want to do it. I wouldn't either, mostly because that's way too much cardio for me. But like it is still like it. All you're asking is you just want them to learn from the mistakes, right? I make mistakes. You make mistakes. The goal is to then learn and get better, and it doesn't always feel like that's the case with Big Ten officiating. There are plenty of officials in the Big Ten that are good. I thought last night's crew did a really good job for the Indiana game. But there are certain ones, and I don't want to mention any by name, that like you see them at the game and you're like, we're in for it. Like, this is going to be a long one, or this is going to be like someone's going to get teed up in this one. And like, how it's going to go. But the game itself, like, Penn State also has this issue. And this is why it's tough to talk about that game without talking about last night too. Yeah. Penn State had this issue of coming out of the half really, really slow. Had leads against Michigan at the half, had a lead against Purdue at the half, lost both games because they couldn't hang on. They came out sleepy. Micah was pretty fed up with it after the Purdue game, right? They come out last night, and it's the exact opposite. They close out Indiana, win in a blowout victory. And to Micah's credit, I think this was really impressive. After the game, he mentioned that he asked his players to be better, and I wrote about this last night. He asked his players to be better, but he asked himself to be better, right? He looked in the mirror, and he reflected on what he was doing, and he was talking about how he was living and dying with every moment, and how you kind of can't do that. And he said, and it was pretty funny, he was laughing when he said it, that his wife and his parents are in town, so his parents and his wife have seen it, and they were just like, "Hey, dum-dum, shut up and coach your team," right? Like, those were their words to him, according to him, right? Like, and that's like, and it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to self-reflect as a head coach. You're the guy in charge. No one kind of checks you, right? Like, no one is there to be like, "Hey, you're doing something wrong," because you're the one dictating everything. And for him to make that adjustment personally, I thought was a really good sign for the future of the program. That being said, the on-the-court stuff last night, pretty drastic improvement from Sunday.
Yeah, it was huge. And just to speak on that Shrewsberry thing, that's just very awesome to hear. You know what I mean? Because I think outside of basketball, outside of everything, that's just something that us as men, we fall short of doing. And I look at myself as well. Like, we fall short of really just looking in the mirror and reflecting on the mistakes that we've made. And, we're quick to be like, well, that wasn't my fault. Or, no, we're quick to do that. And for him to be able to sit back and like, you know what? I'm the leader of these 18 to 21-year-old, 22-year-old kids. And they're looking at me. And I'm not perfect, and I make mistakes. So I have to slow down. I have to understand and look at these and figure out what I can do to be better, to put these kids in a better situation, or put them with the best foot forward. So that was huge. And like you said, when we read that, and it was huge. And I'm very proud to him. And like, I got to do a better job of that. And I can't speak on you, but I'm sure, John, everybody has to do a better job at just literally just reflecting on the positives and the negatives that we do, and how we dictate, how we move on. But as far as the game goes, you just see it was a tale of two different games. It was like literally one here and one there. Like, obviously Penn State jumps on Purdue early in the first half, goes crazy. The adrenaline's pumping. Pickett is telling Edie's too small, in the post. Like, little things like that in the first half. But then you kind of just see how
7'4" Zach Edey, to be clear.
Yeah. And you just see how that thing flips over in the second half. You just, Purdue, that's why they're a top 10 team and top 5 team in the country. They responded well. And pulled out a win on the road. But then you look at the Indiana game last night, where these guys came out, and this is one of the fears, I think, of every Big Ten team. I think any team in the country, when they come see Penn State, when Penn State shoots the lights out like they did last night, is really no hope for anybody. For two of those guys to make 7 threes, on top of, you got Pickett doing his thing as well, man. And I think that if that's going on, man, there's no way you coming out of that with a W at Penn State.
Yeah, and like, the thing is, and people will point to, and some people will be like, oh, they got lucky from deep. Andrew Funk took 12 threes. I think 11 of them were either open or wide open. Seth Lundy took 12 threes. And listen, a lot of those were contested, but with the way he shoots, they really weren't, right? Like, because he's never contested, because he has such a high release. And he can, he goes to that step back a lot, off the one dribble step back. And he, he can get a shot off against anyone. And he's so almost unnervingly confident, right? That like even like someone is like I'm watching, I'm like, oh man, why is he taking that shot? And then he nails it. I'm like, right, because it doesn't matter that someone has a hand in his face because it doesn't impact him. And so those shots that some people will see as contested and be like, you can get those whenever you want. Why are you taking that? 18 seconds left in the shot clock or whatever. It's like, well, because it's a good shot. It's essentially for him an uncontested three. And other guys have to work to get that, but because he's so tall, because he's so long, because he has such a high release, he's able to get that anywhere on the court, which is such a massive thing for Penn State. But yeah, I mean, you nailed it with Purdue, right? Like they just they were dead out of the half. They looked kind of listless, and to me, the turn afterward is so important to get to Indiana, to come out, get the lead. And last night I'm sitting on press row, and when they come out of halftime, Micah had said after the Purdue game that they were going to make some changes coming out of halftime with drills to try and keep guys mentally engaged. And they just basically did the drills that they do pregame, right? The same drills that they do pregame, they did them out of the half. Nothing like overly intense, just like something to like kind of, I think, mentally get them back in that spot of where they are pregame when they come out so strong. And it worked, right? Like there was a little moment where like Indiana made a tiny push, but that's basketball. And then Penn State closed them out from there. And Seth Lundy said after the game, right, that it helped guys stay mentally and physically ready, but loose, right? Like they knew what they needed to do. He also said that the workouts the last couple of days were closer to summer workouts than in-season workouts, to which Micah said, quote, they're not that bad in that same way. So, that was a very nice human moment again from Micah, which I think, to go back to what we were saying earlier, like the humanity of Micah Shrewsberry is such an enormous thing. I published a story on Friday or Saturday morning, 2,000 words in 2 months, which is a lot of time and too much time, quite frankly, where I overthink things when I write. But it was a lot of like, it was just getting to know him. And like, that's what I learned about Micah during all of that, right? Is like who he is as a person, right? You sit down with him so much, you sit down with his wife, you talk to his kids, you talk to people that know him for a while. Like the humanity of Micah Shrewsberry is to me everything. And that's why they were able to make that turn, right? Because Micah asked them to look in themselves in the mirror, and then he looked in the mirror. And I know we said it once already, but you really can't, like that doesn't happen for college basketball coaches. It really just doesn't. And it's so impressive. But like you said, 18 made threes, that also helps. Ties the program record, which they set in the season opener this year against Winthrop. So this like got them back on track. Like this is to me, last night was super necessary. They had to do it. But more importantly, it can change things moving forward, right? And I think now is a good time then to get into the scouting report of what's to come. And what's to come is a game at Wisconsin. And I got to tell you, I've never played at Wisconsin. You have. It doesn't seem like a very fun place to play.
It's definitely not one of my favorites, but they bring their fans out, and they're huge. But they like when I know the teams have changed and different coaches now in Wisconsin, but they would stick to their script no matter what. Wisconsin's going to play Wisconsin basketball. When you walk in, it's going to be freezing because it's the icy hockey rink underneath. So it's cold. The warm-up's going to be cold. It feel like they don't turn the heat on till the game starts. And you just got to withstand everything because they're going to make a run. They always hit at somebody. They always have some forward that's going to make a big-time shot, big dunk somewhere. But you withstand that and be able to try to get the win in other ways. And I'm looking forward to it. But we talked about the team and how, like, they're 3-3 in conference. And, I know I'm jumping a little ahead, but we predicted the 10 that they would be 50%, or if not, one or above, and they're sticking to it. And I will say this is credit to different from the previous Penn State basketball teams. Is usually when you lose those 2 games in a row, you kind of start going down a slope of losses. And for them to bounce back how they did, with good form in Indiana, a good Indiana team, I believe, is huge to see how much the organization and the team is upgrading and moving better, because now, hey, those losses don't mean anything. Yeah, they mean something to us, but we're moving on to the next game, and we're going to go get that game. That's the next game for us to get, and we win that game, and now we're back on track. But I'm excited to see what happens in Wisconsin. Yeah,
and to me, that's what changes this Wisconsin game too, right? Like because you're back on track and you're looking at potentially being 500 in Big Ten play. Now listen, you don't want to lose a road game against Wisconsin. You still have one home game to make up technically in the standings. We talked about this last time. Purdue was technically a Penn State home game. It will be interesting to see, by the way, a little behind the scenes. So the NCAA is still determining whether to count, last I checked anyway, still determining whether to count that as a neutral game or a home game for Penn State, to me, it's pretty clearly a home game for Penn State. Penn State doesn't care either way. Like, it doesn't impact their net or their RPI, all that stuff, like the tournament metrics. But if that counts as an away game for Purdue, that's a big deal. If it counts as a neutral game, that's a bigger deal because it drops it from, I think, from a quadrant 1 win to a quadrant 2 if it's neutral. So I don't know. To me, that's a home game for Penn State. But that's neither here nor there.
John, that's way over my head.
Yeah, but still, like, listen, that was a Penn State crowd, right? Like,
yeah, of course. I'm talking about the quadrants and all that type of stuff.
Penn State crowd, Penn State home. Yeah, I know. We're here to say that back to what we said is all that matters. Ignore the numbers. What we said is matters. This is probably an NCAA tournament team. Yes. But to get to that point, they need to make up that home loss at some point. And, Wisconsin might not be the best place to do it. As you said, it's cold. And then it gets colder, and then it stays cold. And you said they turn the heat on. I was there once. I don't think they do. I think they just let it be cold. And I think, listen, as a guy who keeps his house at 64 degrees, and I'm sure that will startle people, I would love that. Like, that's ideal. Yeah. I may be wearing a beanie and a hoodie right now. It's because I want to. I like this. Yeah. It is very nice for me to be cold. But those Wisconsin teams, you're right. They always have a big that's going to get like a big dunk or some. To me. I was shocked when Brad Davison wasn't on the roster. I just kind of assumed he still would be in year 42 with the Wisconsin program, but he's not. So that's at least a plus for Penn State. Yeah. They do have some effective bigs in Stephen Crow and Tyler Wall. Wall, I think, is the guy that people should be looking out for. A big lefty. He's their leading scorer. Not a great shooter, but will try and take some shots from the mid range. Will shoot from deep if he's open, but he's trying to get to his strong hand there the entire time. But this is, listen, last year's matchup with Wisconsin on the road for Penn State, I think it finished at 50-48 or something like that. Something that I watched from home and regretted watching. I had to, right? Because it's my job. But it was one of those basketball games. It's like, man, not getting those 2 hours back. Like, that's never coming back to me. But this year, I think because of the way Penn State plays, you would hope that it's more entertaining, right? It's more up pace, more up tempo, I should say. But I do think this is probably not the game that they take back, right? Like, probably not the one where they make up for that home loss. Again, home loss in parentheses because it's, or in quotation marks, because it's it was at the Plestra and everything. But listen, it's a chance though, right? Like, and this is what matters for Penn State. This is you have only so many of these opportunities left to make up that loss, and they're good enough if they get hot from deep to beat anyone in the country. Wisconsin's no different, and so fairly evenly matched. Ken Pom has this as a fairly even game. I think it'll be a fairly even game. I don't necessarily expect Penn State to win, but man, if they can get this one after turning things around, before the Indiana game and getting that game, like, that would, to me, that puts this team kind of on a rocket ship, with their trajectory and like really, really swinging upward with where things go from here.
Yeah, I think they can get it. I know it'll be a tough battle because anytime any team going in Wisconsin is a tough battle, but I think you can get it because I'm very happy about how they responded from losing that game against Purdue and bouncing back and playing how they played against Indiana. Obviously, they shot the shit out of the ball, but I think that can keep, hopefully, and I'm hoping that keeps and translates over when they get to Wisconsin. And right now, Wisconsin has lost 2 in a row, so they're going to be ready. Like you said, they probably had some of those summer workout practices for the last couple of days and getting ready for Penn State. So Penn State just has to be ready for that. Hopefully that shooting percentage keeps going on to the next game and they're able to still win on the road.
Yeah, and the big thing here is, too, Penn State has 6 days between last night's game and this game because that game isn't until Tuesday. Yeah. And so there's no like, when you travel, like, they shouldn't be as tired. They should be good to go, right? They can plan that out as they need to. Wisconsin's going to be coming off a game so they play Indiana on Saturday, which will be interesting to see, right, how both of the teams' last games will be against Indiana. So you can kind of directly compare how they performed and where they're going and what they're doing. It is going to be, I think we'll have a lot of information, I should say, heading into that game about how we think it'll go and how they're going to match up. But yeah, I hate to keep saying this, but it really is like the kind of opportunity that it sets up well for them. Even if, like, let's say Wisconsin were better than Wisconsin is, let's say this was a game against, I don't know, like Gonzaga or something, like a non-conference game. Penn State kind of has all the advantages going in, right? They have the days off. They're coming off the win. Wisconsin's playing a couple of days before. Yes, it is at home for Wisconsin, and that matters. But the other advantages, like, are in Penn State's favor, that, maybe you tick up their chances based on that. I will say they do have Wisconsin has a guard in Chucky Hepburn that I really enjoy watching. He is a really good ball handler. They try to get him with the ball a lot. He's been a really good shooter this year after being pretty much an average shooter last year. He's one of those guys that you let him get going and then suddenly he's got 20 and I was like, uh-oh, like what happened? Like how is Penn State down like 37-16? What happened? And it's probably because Chucky Hepburn got hot, right? And so he's one of those guys that I think you have to just sort of monitor and see what's going to happen. But listen, they're, to me, and maybe, you know, I'd like to think I'm not biased, but to me, like, they're pretty much all winnable for Penn State the rest of the way.
Yeah.
Except maybe that game at Mackey Arena against Purdue. That one is, that one's going to be dicey. Because last I checked, Zach Edey's not getting any shorter, which is a shame for all of the teams that have to face him. You know, but the rest of the way, like, there aren't a ton here that you look at and they're like, oh man, there's no chance for Penn State here. They're all winnable.
Yeah, I don't think, as you saw last night against Indiana, if they can shoot like that, I think it's fear in all the other teams. I don't think they want to play Penn State basketball when those guys are hitting threes. That means that it's more space for Pickett to get in the paint and find and get to the basket. And then you got all these guys shooting threes. Like, you know what I mean? You got 2 1,000-point scorers with Lundy and Dredd, you know. And so, and now you're talking about Funk as well, and Winter with the speed he has. Like, I think the team is built. You know, obviously you talk about the things that we're missing is obviously with Edey, we need that big man presence. But without that and those guys able to make threes, I mean, it kind of just sweeps the not having a big man right now, because I don't want to knock those freshmen, is not having a big man right now. You kind of sweep it under the rug. You're able to hide them and develop them until it's time for them to be able to become the stars that they need to be. But if those guys can keep hitting threes and Pickett keeps playing how he's playing, like you said, I mean, Pickett is top 2, top 3 in all categories and rebounds, assists, points, you know, in the Big Ten, which is crazy with the amount of competition and amount of players that are in the Big Ten right now. We talk about Edey and Player of the Year, and, you know, I mean, we talk about Pickett as well right underneath him. You know, so it's crazy to see that. But I don't think any team wants to play Penn State when they're able to make shots. I think everybody wants those off nights and, you know, where they missing shots. But when those guys can make shots, I don't think anybody wants to play them.
Yeah, and I think you'll know when Penn State takes the next step as a program because they'll play one of these good teams and they'll have an off night shooting and then they'll win anyways. Right? Yeah. Like that'll be when you know, like, sort of what it's taken that next step. What's crazy, you mentioned the 1,000-point scores. They get Seth and Miles this year have hit it. Cam is a 1,000-point scorer. Funk is a 1,000-point scorer, and Pick is a 1,000-point scorer. Only 2 other team in the countries, I believe. Shout out to Daniel Gallen of Lions 24/7. Him and I were talking about this last night, and he found this. There are only 2 other teams in the country that have 5,000-point scorers, and it's San Diego and UAB. Right, like that doesn't happen. Like it just doesn't happen. And so I think like it's a testament to the longevity that these guys have, but also I think to the sense of urgency that they need to have because they're not getting any younger. They're not getting extra years of eligibility. You know, as much as Micah Shrewsberry would like to get them, he always joked last year that he was going to petition for what felt like a 50th year of John Harrah playing basketball for Penn State, but. You know, and he would joke that he wanted the media to sign the petition. He wanted everyone to sign the petition because he wanted to make sure he could bring him back. That's not going to happen, right? Like, you just don't have that. So I do think this is an important one, but I do think it's also, I don't want to call it losable because that's not the right phrasing, but it is one you can lose and it doesn't really change much unless like something catastrophic happens. That's always possible, but it's not something that I would expect. But let's move to the word on campus here. I think at this point, that is all about Micah. Right, like this is all about, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. It's all about who he is as a person, right, and who he has shown himself to be. Because and I want to talk about this because I've covered plenty of college basketball coaches, some of them, and college football coaches too. Some of them are not easy to interact with, right? Some of them lack that level of humanity, that level of empathy. And I mentioned that massive story that I wrote, and you can find that at SundayDaily.com. Like it is jarring to me almost that how like human he is, and to the point that his wife Molly, whose voice is in the story, she quote tweeted the story and everything, and was like said she was crying reading about it, and I have confirmed through Micah that she was crying while reading the story in the morning on Saturday. Yeah, so like I made her cry. So I apologize, Molly, for making you cry, but like it is, and there wasn't anything like overly emotional in the story, right? But it is to me like the fact that she has that level of empathy, right? Like, it's so important for both of them. It's not just Micah, to be clear, because like all of these basketball programs, like it's not just Greg Gard at Wisconsin. It's not just Tom Izzo at Michigan State. It's their families too, right? They're in it. And the whole story is about like how it's his family doing this together and everything. And like, to me, like Micah being that human, I'm sure it makes him easier to root for fans. But from my perspective, it makes him easier to work with. It makes him easier to communicate with. It makes him easier to understand, which I think some people don't realize. Like, it's then easier for me to, when I do those stories, like you can get a better view of who he is then, because he's good at communicating who he is. And my favorite quote, other than when he mentioned that he was a house dad at a frat when he was at DePaul, which was a very, very funny thought to have, because he was that was back when he was a GA there. But my favorite quote was like, he basically just said, like, I don't have time to be anyone else, right? He's like, I'm me, and that's not going to change. And to like talk about confidence, right? Confidence in yourself and what you believe, like to be so confident in who you are, to be willing to say that. And when what's funny, there was no like, people can say that and someone could push back and be like, oh, this is like, you know, how arrogant or whatever. Like, no, it was all like, yeah, it's who he is. Like no one said a negative word about Micah. You do these stories and you want to tell both sides of it. I tried. No one was going to say anything negative about Micah. And like, again, I hate to, you know, continue to glow about someone because it's my job to cover him and everything. But like, I really, Penn State should cherish him while they have them. I'll say that, because it seems like he is sort of a once in a generation head coach from an X's known standpoint and from a who he is as a person standpoint. And I know you've dealt with a lot of coaches, and I'm sure you have some that stand out that are very human and also very not human. Yep. And when you deal with someone who is very human, I think it's so refreshing.
You hit it right on the head, John. Everything you said about what you want in a coach is someone that's human. You know, man, we're not above you. He's not above you. You know, we're on the same level. We're going through this fight together, and that's huge. And I had a brief stint where I was able to be under Micah in Boston when I came out of Penn State and I went undrafted. I went to camp with Boston and he was still there, and I really appreciated him and some of the other coaches there, because even though I had a long shot to make the team, that they still treated me as if I was, you know, on the team. And, you know, you get to those sometimes in situations where the guys, we're just filling out a roster, and you kind of get left in the dust. But no, Shrewsberry was always there. Hey, Tim, come on, just get in this drill. Let's do this, let's do that. And he had me with everybody else. You know, at the time it was Avery, Rondo was still there, Phil Pressey. You know, I'm speaking on guards, and he always kept me in the loop and made sure I was in the loop. And I always appreciate that, because at the end of the day, it showed me what I needed to do, how I needed to work, you know, on top of what I had already known. But he gave me the opportunity, and he treated me like I was one of them, you know. And at the time, I was still, like I said, I was a long shot of making a team. And, you know, I went to the G League and did my thing in Maine. But I appreciate that 100%. But you keep talking about the humility that he has, and he is who he is. He's not going to change for anybody. And I respect that. And it's not necessarily being a cocky person. I am who I am. I ain't changing for nobody. But it's the humbleness of being, hey, you know what? I've been raised by my parents the right way. I've been through struggles. I've learned from my struggles. I've fallen. I've got up. And I've been in so many different situations, and I've learned from so many different people. You think about where he's come from and all the other coaches that he's been underneath, and how much he's learned and the knowledge that he's soaked in. That, you know what I mean, he has the right to be able to say, you know what, hey, I am who I am, and I'm gonna stay true to who I am, and I'm always gonna be that person. And at the end of the day, hey, I can only be myself, as you wrote. And his family are phenomenal. His kids phenomenal. His wife as well. Obviously, I've only met him. It's only a brief stint, you know, when I was in Boston, but they were always around. And you can't speak nothing but great things about the guy. You know what I mean? And as you said, like, that should be the topic in Happy Valley right now. You can't, like, football's over. Basketball is now, and what Shrewsberry is doing right now, what the type of person he is, man, we should be speaking on that on top of, you know, what he's gotten his players to be able to do so far in the Big Ten and in the season.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned his kids always being around. They still are, right? Like, yeah. And Braden's going to be on the roster next year. It's crazy. Yeah. Like, it's always been about family for him. He made that very clear. I think that's part of why, like, Molly was crying. Right? They're like high school sweethearts, which is something. It's funny when I interviewed her for the story. it was supposed to be a 30-minute interview, but her and Micah were high school sweethearts, and me and my wife were high school sweethearts. And so like there's a certain level of perspective you get when you're like that, right? Because you watch someone grow up, right? You see them grow. So she has a more unique view than anyone could possibly have, right? Because they've been through everything together. And so to hear her talk about him in such a glowing way, and like, she would, people make jokes about their spouses all the time. And like, she threw like, there were jokes, but they were never like he does this and I hate this, right? Like it was it was all like everything is so positive about their whole family, right? Like everything is, and nothing's perfect. I'm not like trying to say it's like the perfect family or whatever. Nothing ever is, but like they really like the care he has for his family, I think is special. And from what we can see and the way he cares for his players is the same, because like you said, and like I had that story, like, he just doesn't have the time to change. When I sat down and talked to him for this, because I like to think I'm the same way, right? Like I'm just kind of who I am. And part of that for me, as I told him, was like, it's just too hard to be anything else. Like I'm lazy. Like that's a lot of effort to try and like fake something for like, even if whether it's on this podcast or whether I'm like talking to my editor for a story or I'm talking to you off the pod, like it's a lot of effort, man, to be something else. Like I just don't, I'm just lazy. It's way easier to do this. And he's like, yeah, man, it's just hard. Like I was like, why would you do that? Like it's putting more effort in than necessary. But no, I think it all goes back to him, that all of this whole season, all of this goes back to him. I think, like I said, who knows how long he'll be at Penn State. That was one of the things in the story. I actually asked him, like, what's the plan? Like, because you got to be upfront, right? And maybe that's not the easiest question to ask, but like you got to ask. And he said he's happy, right? And like sometimes for a guy like that, that's all you really need, which I think, was really, really interesting. But I think that's a good place to wrap it today. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Jon Sauber, where you can find all those stories. You can find Tim on Twitter at TimPhrase23. You can find this podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Beyond the Big Ten, 10 spelled out the numeral 10, and on YouTube at Beyond Big Ten, again, 10 spelled out 10. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Have a great day.
Beyond the Big Ten is a network of podcasts that aims to be your go-to resource for all things Big Ten. We cover the entire conference with shows hosted by ex-players and athletic alumni, aiming to be your go-to source of information and entertainment for your favorite team. Hosted by ex-Big Ten players, media, and insiders, our podcasts are focused on giving diehard fans and those alums an inside scoop about the teams and people that make the Big Ten Conference one of the most watched and most talked about conferences in sports. We're excited to talk Big Ten basketball with you wherever you may be. Subscribe now.